Now let's modify the lights to make it seem like a true outdoor scene. By going into the light library and selecting none for the lighting setup, all the lights in the scene are erased. We're going to add our own lights now. The most common lights for a scene that takes place outdoors is the infinite light. We're going to add 3 lights total. 2 of them will simply be filler lights to slightly illuminate the sides of our scene and objects, while the main light will represent the sun, which will be coming down from overhead and have a much higher intensity relative to the other 2. By rotating these lights around, you can change the direction from where they come. It's always easy to tell which way an infinite light is pointing, because one end has an arrowhead on it. Rotate the 2 filler lights to angles roughly 180 degrees apart, like this. We'll raise the intensity of the main light and turn on shadows for a nice effect. If we zoom out and perform a test render, you'll notice the scene is now lighted as if it were outdoors on a sunny day. We notice the support for the overpass we had placed earlier is protruding through the floor of the overpass, so let's correct this. By zooming in and adjusting the size, we can move the support column down a little so that it no longer pokes out from above. Even with the most careful planning, you'll find simple little mistakes like this sometimes occur. Just be sure to keep your eyes peeled, because if you don't notice it during the construction phase, you might have to redo your final render. We'll give the main light a slightly green tint. I'll explain why in a few steps. Now that this is done, we're going to perform a test render to make sure everything looks good. We now switch back to the camera view. Performing the render here, we notice that the scene is a little too bright. By pressing left and right on the arrow keys, you can scroll through objects without having to specifically click on them. We find our main light, and we bring its intensity down a little. Also, let's take this chance to set our background color. If you remember correctly, many of the scenes in the movie that took place inside the Matrix had a slight green tint to them. The sky, for example, was a faint green instead of blue, so we'll modify the background accordingly. It usually takes a few test renders to figure out what the best lighting setup is for any scene, so feel free to experiment with different intensities, colors, and types until you find the one that suits your needs. Now that the lighting setup is complete, we're going to glue together all the road segments to make the entire road surface into one object. We're also going to bring the axis to the center of the object. This is just something I like to do as a rule of thumb whenever I complete an object. I found it makes it a little easier on you later, should you need to rotate the object. The inanimate parts of our scene are now done, so let's start adding some of the cars. I'll load the car model that you saw earlier. This one has a driver in it, which I glued in there. We're going to need to scale the car down to fit our roadway. So switching to the top view, we use the lane markers to guide us. Once we feel we have the right size, we go ahead and we switch to the front view. We have to ensure that the car's vertical position is correct and that the tires are on the road's surface. Once we feel that the position is correct, we'll move back to the perspective view. Now remember, since this will be a crowded highway scene, we need to make several copies of this car. Remember, in the real world, not all the cars are going to be the same color. So, in here you have to make sure that each car is a different shade. You can have 1 or 2 of them repeat the same color, but I'd recommend having no more than 2 with the same one. At this step, you can give each car a reflective color and add all types of exotic shaders. But we'll just leave it as a simple color for now, to keep the rendering times down. You'll find that it's very easy and fun to pile effects on top of one another, but don't get too carried away. The more complex your colors are, the longer it takes TrueSpace to render them, especially when ray trace and anti-alias are on. You have to find the right balance between visual quality and rendering times. After coloring each car's body and roof, go ahead and perform a test render to see how they look.